Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Di, and today I'm bringing you my April and May wrap up for the novels that I read. I didn't do a wrap up in April because I only read one novel in April. So I've been heavily focused on my manga reading lately. I've really been enjoying all of the titles that I've been reading, and it kind of was prompted by the Lohali 30 for 30 challenge, where we were challenged to read one volume of manga a day in April, and so I focused most of my reading time on that. Plus, if you watched my last wrap up for March Mystery Madness, you know that I had a change in location for my occupation, and so that kind of hindered filming a little bit. And because I was working from home, I didn't listen to audiobooks as much, and so I really didn't get much reading time in other than the manga volumes I was reading for April. So anyway, I did manage to read 4 novels in the month of May, and so I will combine the one volume that I read in April in this wrap up, and yeah, let's just get into it. So the first novel that I want to talk about is Rogue. This is the second book in the Talon series by Julie Kagawa. This series is about an organization of human shifting dragons. There is an organization of these dragons who are like ready to take over the world. They've been hunted down by another organization called St. George, who are dragon slayers and have basically decimated their numbers. And so now Talon is raising their young and trying to assimilate them into human society. So in the first book of the series, which is called Talon, we follow one of those young dragons who's being assimilated into society, and her name is Ember, and she actually has a twin. And twins in the dragon species in this series is very rare. But both her and her twin are like with a foster family, and they're learning how to be human so they can assimilate well into our society. As she's assimilating into our society, she meets another dragon who doesn't belong to Talon. And most of the dragons in this world do belong to Talon, and so those that are not a part of Talon are considered like rogue dragons. And so they're like seen as being against the organization and need to be taken care of. But she meets this rogue dragon, and he kind of changes her view on what Talon stands for and what their objectives actually are. Now, her changing views on Talon differ greatly from her twins, and so we kind of get to see that affect their relationship a bit in the first book. Now in the second book, which is the one that I read in April, we follow Ember as she's come to a realization of how she feels about Talon and her relationship with this rogue dragon, but we also follow her relationship with a member of St. George who also has kind of had his views changed about his organization. I read Talon in 2015 and I really enjoyed it, but at the time I realized that there were going to be more books out in this series, and I think only the 3rd book had come out by then. And so I took a break from it because I really dislike having to wait for subsequent installments. And so I decided to finally get back into it because I believe the series is now close to completion, if not complete. And I have to say that I didn't enjoy Rogue as much as I enjoyed Talon, or at least not as much as I remember enjoying Talon. In this second installment, there is a love triangle that's featured heavily, and I still dislike love triangles to some extent. This one particularly bothered me because I do feel like she definitely has feelings for one more than the other, especially in the way that she acts with both of them. It's kind of the same issue I have with the Hannah Swenson books by Joanne Fluke, if you know what I'm talking about. That kind of thing kind of grates on my nerves, especially when I can see that she definitely acts more like she likes one of them over the other, yet she still has feelings for both of them. I don't like that too much. This installment did lag for me a bit more, as second installments usually do. There was a lot more things happening in this one, but we also get a lot of backstory on one of the characters, so we were having a jump from present to past, and I truly really wasn't interested in the backstory we were getting, and I'm not sure like why so much of it was relevant to where we are in the story right now. I did listen to this mostly on audiobook, and they do a really good job about having a different narrator for each of our main characters, which I appreciated, because I believe this book does not have chapter numbers. This has chapters that has each of the characters' names at the beginning, so you know whose point of view we are in during that section. And usually when I read those types of novels physically, I have a hard time remembering whose point of view I'm in at that time. So being able to listen to a different voice and knowing right off the bat whose point of view we're in at that time, I really appreciated. I do still plan on continuing with this series, and like I said, second books usually are laggy for me, and even though I disliked how much they focused on the love triangle portion of the story, as well as the constantly flipping between present and past, I do want to see where the story goes in the next one, because we're kind of left at not really a cliffhanger, but a decision point at the end of this second installment. And so I'm really interested to see how the next part of this is going to play out. The next book I read was an ARC, which was given to me by the First to Read program from Penguin Random House. Thank you to that program for providing me with this ARC in exchange for my honest review. So I was attracted to this book because its synopsis sounded like it was going to be a supernatural or fantastical mystery. And as you know, I really enjoy my mysteries. And so I applied for this ARC and was accepted to give a review on it. Now this book is Unraveling. It is by Karen Lord, and it should have been released on June 4th. At least I think it was. This book, I had a a really hard time with it. It was very confusing. I'm not even sure that I can give you a good synopsis on it. This book follows a forensic therapist, and she has just completed a trial of a serial killer. And so she's kind of feeling good about it. They convicted somebody, but there's just this feeling inside that they didn't catch the right person. And then she meets Chance, who happens to be an immortal, and he takes her to this world where there's a labyrinth, and she can apparently go through her mind and what she knows about this case by walking the labyrinth. So it's kind of like a delve into your subconscious kind of thing, things that you know but don't present themselves, or you can't recall, or little pieces aren't like present enough where you can find them relevant. I don't know that I'm explaining that right, but it's really, that really just shows you how confused I was with this book. But basically, Chance, and not only Chance, other like immortal beings, and they're not like vampires, they're more like gods. They have an interest in this case, and she doesn't know why, but the only way for them to figure out who the real killer is, the immortals need her to figure it out by walking this labyrinth, basically. There's a lot that happens in this book, and even though I did keep wanting to read it, when I sat down and read it, I thought I understood what I was reading, but then in hindsight, I didn't really. Like, I would read it, it would be fine, but if you asked me about it, I was confused. Like, I don't know what it was about this book that didn't sit well with me. I understood what was going on in that moment in time, but if I look back on the story as a whole, I'm still struggling to figure out what this story really was about. It seemed to veer into different storylines a whole lot of the time, and I feel like that is why the labyrinth was used. But I think this story would have been better suited to like a mini series or maybe a movie where you could visually see what was going on, because in my mind this story didn't work for me very well. This is my first read of a Karen Lord book, and I kind of want to read something else that she's written just to see if maybe it's her writing style. But another thing that really confused me was that you don't know where you are in this book. When we are in the real world, you're not once told specifically what country or city the story takes place in. And I found that very difficult. I think the synopsis on Goodreads says something about it being in the Caribbean. But I'm just unsure. It really could have taken place anywhere besides the names that were mentioned, the names of other characters. Those were definitely like ethnic, but I couldn't tell you where those names would be from. So I guess that added to my confusion on this book. Unfortunately, because I'm having such a difficult time even like trying to tell you what this story was about, I can't say that I enjoyed this story. It was definitely different from what I expected going in. It wasn't a bad story. Like, it was interesting as I was reading it, but even now, it's been like a month since I've read it, and I'm still having trouble even being able to tell you what the story was about. So yeah, I'd definitely try something else from this author, but this book just didn't sit well with me, unfortunately. The next book I read was The Midnight Witness, which is the first book in the Louise Rick mystery series by Sarah Bladel. I read The Forgotten Girls a couple years ago. It was through Barnes & Noble's serial reads program, where you can read a book in chapters. Every month they have a new book, which happened to be the 8th book in this series. And I normally don't read series out of order, but I had no idea at the time that it was the 8th book in a series. But thankfully that book read kind of like a standalone, and I didn't have a confusion about what may have played out in the past, and I really enjoyed that one. So I wanted to start over from the beginning, and thankfully my friend Tim over at the World of Sleuths, he has a Goodreads group, and I'll link it down in the description box below in case you're interested. But he decided that he wanted to do Mysteries of the World read as his kind of monthly read. He also does a series read, but this was May's selection for his World of Sleuths read-along. And so I thought, what better way to start at the beginning with this series. This one wasn't as good as The Killing Girls, but again, it is a first book in the series. I was already familiar with Louise and her friend Camilla and their dynamic from my read. Louise is a homicide detective, and Camilla is her best friend who happens to be a reporter at a newspaper, I think. And in this book, we follow Louise investigating not only the murder of a young woman who's strangled in a park, but also the murder of a journalist friend of Camilla's. Camilla kind of gets too involved in the investigation of this because she's personally because she personally knows the victim. Now, had I read this book first, this had been my first read of this series, I probably would have been hesitant to continue. I really disliked how Louise treated Camilla. I dislike how Louise treated her significant other. Louise isn't a very likable character in this book. I am glad that I read The Killing Girls first, because I know that she changes, and based on the character that I read in that book. But yeah, I really disliked how she treated people around her. It actually really amazed me that Louise and Camilla were friends. Not only with the way Louise treated Camilla, but kind of the way Camilla treated Louise as well. Not only personally, but professionally. The investigation of these murders was interesting. And this series does take place in Denmark, I believe. So the scenery was also very interesting, and how they mentioned that murder is not very common there. So having two big murders like this roughly around the same time was kind of shocking to the community. Unfortunately, I did figure out who the killer was on one of the murders rather quickly. And that I can't even tell you how I figured it out. But I do feel like I was spoiled for it. And if you read this book, you'll know what I mean. So that was kind of disappointing. But like I said, I will be continuing this series because I did enjoy The Forgotten Girls a lot. And even though that is the 8th book in this series, I do still need to read books 2 through 7. I have been slowly collecting these novels, but I don't have this first one. I did end up borrowing it from the library, and I did listen to a good portion of it on audiobook. But yeah, I enjoyed this one, and will definitely be continuing on to the next installment. The last 2 books I read in May were a duology, and that is The Girl from the Well duology. The first book is The Girl from the Well. The second book is The Suffering, both by Rin Chupeco. Rin Chupeco is the author of the Bone Witch trilogy, which I have also been reading over the last couple years. The last book on that one came out this year, and I'm going to try to get to it in the next couple months, but we'll see about that. Anyway, Girl from the Well. I really wanted to read something Asian in the month of May because it was Asian Pacific Heritage Month, and The Girl from the Well is based on a Japanese legend. You probably would know the character that is portrayed in this book more if you have watched the movie The Ring. The character in that movie was also based off the same Japanese legend, and the well is also prevalent in that movie as well. But this story follows that spirit, and in this book her name is Okiku, and she basically hunts down serial killer of children. So when she's roaming around the earth, and she's not centralized to Japan, now she's in the United States in this book, or in this series, and she roams and she sees people. She can see the spirits of children who were murdered by people in a way where it kind of is like they are chained to that person's back. And so if she looks at somebody and they're a murderer of children, she can see like their spirits on their back. So she basically kills them to release the spirits of these children. This book also follows a teenager named Tarquin, and he is half Japanese, half Caucasian, I believe. And in this first book, Okiku kind of sees that he has something in him. He's not a serial killer, but he's different. And so it kind of follows her, I guess, getting to know him and what his secret is. I think that's really all I can tell you about this series without giving like major stuff away. But I really enjoyed this duology. I listened to all of the second book, The Suffering, on audiobook, and the first book, The Girl from the Well, I read and listened to. I thought the first book was really interesting. It really caught my attention. It was definitely gruesome as far as how Kiku deals with these serial killers. And Tarquin's Secret was interesting as well. The second book takes place mostly in Japan, in Aokigahara, or it's better known as the Suicide Forest. I thought it was a really great setting for that story. I probably liked them both equally, though at the end of the second story, the way that it wrapped up doesn't make like realistic sense to me. And even though I can see why the author would want the story to go that way, it just wasn't feasible for me. I also noticed that while I was listening to it, some of the pronunciation of Japanese terms was not correct. It was very Americanized. And I don't understand why, when other words were pronounced correctly, why this particular one, or one particular one, stood out to me in most obviously, and it like grated on my nerves. I was like, why didn't you catch that while you were recording it? But that's beyond the point, or besides the point. Other than that, I thought the narration was done well. Like I said, really enjoyed this duology, and I do enjoy Rin Chipiko's writing quite a bit. And yeah, I really enjoyed this duology and do definitely recommend it if you're looking for a creepy read. Anyway, those are all of the novels that I read in the months of April and May. Let me know if you've read any of these. I do have written reviews for all of these books on Goodreads or my blog, so if you're interested in seeing what else I might have thought of these books. I don't always cover everything that I have written on my reviews there in these video reviews, so if you'd like to see what I thought of those right after reading them, please feel free to go take a look there. All of the links are down in the description box below. And yeah, I hope you're all doing great, and until next time, take care and smile always. Bye!